If you watched my Crash 1 review, I mentioned how I would look at Crash 2 next, since it's my favourite in the series. Well, forget I said any of that, because this game has been on my mind for a while for some reason. The Wrath of Cortex. This game has quite a divisive reputation online, comparable to literally any Sonic game. Some love this game, and some people despise it, claiming it ruined the franchise. I remember not enjoying it too much in my last playthrough. But I want to give this game a fair chance. Who knows, the game might actually be good! I've stated a few times in the past that I have pleasant nostalgic memories of this game, being one of the first games I've ever played, alongside the first Crash Bandicoot game. I was never good at it, being a stupid child and all. I like to think that I've matured as a gamer over the years, and I can see this game for what it is, and form a proper opinion. The history of this game's development is a tragic one. As we all know, Naughty Dog made 4 incredible Crash games on the PS1, but then handed over the rights to the series to whoever wanted it, which led to Crash Bash being released, and nobody remembers that game. Be sure to correct me in the comments, all 3 Crash Bash mega fans. Whoa, what's that? The PlayStation 2 is releasing? We need to release a new Crash Bandicoot game now. Enter Traveler's Tales, responsible for the commercial successes that were Pugsy and Muppet Race Mania. Naughty Dog no longer wanted anything to do with the Bandicoot and threw him away. This new Crash Bandicoot game initially was planned to be a more free-roaming type platformer, abandoning the linear hallway design, but this idea terrified Universal Entertainment, who was publishing these games, and decided to stick to what worked before and offered a whopping 12 months of time to finish the game. If you don't know much about modern game development, 12 months is not a lot of time, especially if you're developing a game for a brand new console. It very rarely leads to good results. I said rarely, it can happen. Smash Melee is a good example of games that turned out pretty good despite the crunch. It's also worth noting that this game allowed Crash to finally swap spit with Nintendo and the new Xbox console. Similarly to a certain Hedgehog. Just with less leaving the console market and all that. On October 29th, 2001, the new game, The Wrath of Cortex, was released. And it sure released. The story of the game goes as such. Uka Uka is having a hissy fit because not enough evil is being done, because Crash always shows up to stop them. But Cortex has a new super weapon in development. Apparently this new weapon has unbelievable strength or something. This secret weapon is a Super Bandicoot by the name of Crunch. Essentially what Crash would have become if he didn't escape from Cortex. I think this concept is actually pretty neat. So far so good, Wrath of Cortex. Uka Uka in turn awakes the 4 elemental masks who control the major elements of the planet. They have such imaginative names as Pyro, Rocco, Wawa, and Lolo. Riveting. All of this is revealed in a 6-minute cutscene when you start the game. Except it just keeps dragging and feels more like 10 minutes. There's absolutely no movement in this cutscene. Also good luck catching the plot over the atrocious sound mixing.
You cannot restrain them, Uka Uka. They are far too dangerous.
This cutscene also reveals the game's unique art style. To be blunt, it looks appalling. The faces are too squished together and they rarely show any major emotion. If you're playing the Xbox version, Crash and Coco have this realistic fur effect on their models, making them look less ugly, I suppose. The game's visual presentation as a whole is unsightly, looking worse than the PS1 platformers in some case. This game has so many levels full of flat textures, weird visual glitches, and the aforementioned horrid character models. Obviously the developers were affected by this time crunch and couldn't further polish the game. However, the game does run at 60 frames per second with rare frame rate dips, at least in my experience. So there's that at least. When you are finally granted control of Crash, it is immediately noticeable how different the physics feel compared to the previous games. Crash feels kind of floaty and his animations look kind of off, probably to make up for the added frames. The best example of this is with his slide jump. I'm still not really sure what his right hand is doing in this animation. However, the game's levels are built for this slightly different physics, so it barely even shows itself when playing. Crash also controls super fluently and satisfyingly. Speaking of which, Crash retains all of his basic movement techniques from 3. Alright, let's look at the first level, Arctic Antics. Starting off the game with a snow level. Okay, a little strange. One of the most talked about aspects that people dislike is the quote-unquote egregious loading screens. But unless you're playing the very original release of the PS2 version, the loading isn't even that bad. Nitro Fueled has worse loading than this, and nobody really complains about that game. Probably because that game is actually good. Whoops! So this first level is actually pretty good. The game keeps bonus platforms, and looks like it has a death platform in the first level. which leads to a colored gem. That's cool with a capital K. The soundtrack is also incredible, my favorite aspect of the entire game in fact. Here are some samples to bop to. So that was a good start. What's the next level? Oh. It's no secret this game takes a lot of inspiration from 3, and obviously the designers really liked all the vehicle segments because by golly we have a whole lot of not platforming to do in this platformer. Obviously every Crash game has levels where you are riding on something, with varying success. Crash 2 is my favorite. That game is so consistently good, but then they had to slam their faces against a wall with the fucking jetpack, halting the streak of amazing levels with 2 horrid, slow, terribly controlling levels that bleed their influence into the worst final boss in the series. This game does that multiple times over. Let's quickly go over each of the alternate gameplay styles, because Lord knows they're more interesting than the actual platforming levels. The plane is just like in 3. Overall it's actually okay, at least this version is. Because this thing here is absolutely vapid. You no longer have automatic gunfire. You now have to lock onto your targets for a century, and then fire your missiles while being fired at by planes that have no such handicap. It's just boring. Atmosphere levels are really fun actually. Rolling around in a ball is a unique take on the Crash Bandicoot formula. Swimming returns from 3. Hooray. They were bearable in 3, but in this one it is already not great. And then they have to shove you into this giant yellow hitbox with limited movement capabilities, as they hide explosive mines behind level geometry. Just what I've always wanted! It sucks because the water levels are actually some of the most beautiful levels in the entire game, with detailed and colourful scenery to look at. There is also this car racing level. If you hated the motorbike levels in 3, this level will give you an aneurysm. And somehow I survived mine. Do you like the second Alien movie? That's good, because they put it into Crash Bandicoot for some reason, complete with clunky aiming and like a billion wind-up frames for you to jump. There are several other miscellaneous vehicles that are often plonked slap bang in the middle of otherwise good platforming levels. That's the thing, the platforming is actually really good in this game, but there are too many times that they are interrupted by some stupid gimmick. That's all they are, gimmicks. Gimmicks made to add variety. Because that's what made Crash Warped so good, right? I'd love to talk more about the platforming levels, but they are just so standard. It's hard to say anything of substance. So here are some highlights. What are these creatures supposed to be? Are they in the right game? The animals in the western level are probably the most disgusting things I've ever seen in a game. What creative decision led to the ceiling grates being so damn slow? Like, is this a bug or an intentional mechanic? Calling it a snail's pace is an insult to snails. Why are TNT explosions so wimpy? This X-ray section is actually really cool, I love it. Oh, these guys are back. Sweet callback. Oh, and I almost forgot you could play as Coco. That's cool. Okay, but where does Crunch fit into all of this? Isn't he like the Knuckles to Crash's Sonic the Hedgehog? You see, Crunch serves the role of all of the game's boss fights. All of them. In each one he wears one of the celebrity masks and fights Crash in one of the 4 gameplay styles. Rolling into rocks, jumping over water, blasting water up Crunch's ass, and Star Fox. But what about the classic bosses in the intro? What function do they serve? Nothing. They do nothing. They do try their best though. Oh, Tiny. Not only did they make you ugly, they took your brain as well. These boss fights range from good to frustrating, but the final boss is legitimately good. In this fight, Crunch harnesses the power of all 4 masks at once, making you memorize what they all do and what order they happen in. Most of the phases can be cheese though. Just like in 3, boss fights reward you with such iconic power-ups as the Sneak Shoes. Now you can tiptoe across deliberately placed lines of nitro boxes. Sweet! As well as the standard Death Tornado Spin, Fruit Bazooka, Crash Dash, and Double Jump. Not in that order though, I don't know why I wrote it like that. Bizarrely, the Super Belly Flop is found in some random bonus section in some random level. I don't have footage of it because it's so randomly hidden. I also didn't know where to put this, but watch this funny clip from a while back. What? I guess I put too much trust in this game. We did it! We did it! We did it, guys! We did it! Can I spin? Am I losing my mind? Or, But how does The Wrath of Cortex act as a sequel to Crash 3? They wanted this game to be Crash 4 after all. Well, right off the bat, the story isn't a direct sequel to Crash 3. Don't worry, I don't really care all that much about Crash Bandicoot stories. Plot isn't high on my priority list for Crash. Don't worry, I'm not that far gone. But in the original trilogy, the 3 games took place right after each other. There was slight continuity. But this game completely ignores that. How does Cortex and Uka Uka escape from their fate at the end of Crash 3? Who cares, I guess. Speaking of Crash 3, this game tries to be Crash 3, but more. Because more is better. Crash 3 introduced a new evil mask. This game introduces 4 more. Crash 3 has a healthy balance of vehicles and platforming. This game ignores that and makes the game mostly vehicles. Crash 3 introduced playable Coco. This game also does this. Hell, the hub world is very similar. Even the main theme song is practically identical. Wanting to expand on the previous game is completely fine. It can lead to some really good games. But this is not the way to do it. This game has very little identity to call its own. It's just emulating Crash 3, imitating it. That volcano level in the final world is one of my favorites, because it's actually a unique idea that doesn't suck like the mech suit or buggy. So it's not a very good sequel either. Overall, the game is fine. I hate using this word, but it is literally mid. The most 5 out of 10 experience I've ever played. The good is pretty good, but it makes up so little of the overall experience. It's not a game that I would ever want to 100% complete. A lot of the appeal of Crash games comes from replaying the levels to 100% them, so that's a real flaw in the game's design. It really is the most unfocused, directionless game in the series. Not that it matters because the game is no longer canon, maybe it's placed in the adult timeline for all we know. And now we have a real Crash 4 to play, and it's really good! But just like in Wrath of Cortex, where is the Crash dance?